Kia ora koutou. Thanks for having us here today, and thanks for coming along to have a listen to our presentation. It's good to see a good number of people made it past morning tea and have dropped in to have a listen to us talking about the Fair Trading Act. So, by way of quick introduction, you've got two of us today, myself, Grant McIntosh, and Iain Sutherland, sitting over on the edge there. And my background, I've been in consumer protection enforcement for 20 or so years across the UK and now New Zealand, working across investigations, enforcement, compliance in a range of different areas. Iain is one of our senior compliance advisors, and he's got a particular experience in online sales practice, digital design, and has got some really great recent experience in identifying misleading sales practices online as well. So we'll shift between the two of us as we go on, and as our gentleman said, we'll be available at the end for questions as well. So if anybody's got anything burning, wants to have a chat about the Fair Trading Act or general principles, then very happy to do that. So you may well be aware, you may have seen it, you may have a copy of it, we may have spoken to you. We sent an open letter recently to the New Zealand gaming industry. We also, along with that, had conversations with some specific game developers that we had identified. The background to that is that earlier this year there was an IcePen sweep. So IcePen is the International Consumer Protection Enforcement Network. We, at the Commerce Commission, are part of that network, along with other regulators around the world. And we came together to do a sweep of online and gaming products to look for particular conduct that might be problematic. That IcePen sweep, there's a report online if you have an interest in that. And it covered slightly broader principles than we're going to look at today. So things like manipulation of gamers, disclosures, virtual currencies and how they're supplied, loot boxes, and protection of minors. What we've done following that sweep is identify 5 key areas that we thought, with our current legislation in New Zealand, were quite relevant to the gaming industry and where we thought there might be some risk of breach within the industry that we could help provide some information on. As I said, 10 studios were included in that sweep, and we've been in contact directly with those 10, and we also put out that industry-wide letter that gives you some information on that, on those 5 specific areas that we've identified. If you don't have a copy of the letter, it's available on the Gaming Federation website. If you still can't find it, feel free to email us or drop it in the clinic. We've got copies with us as well if you'd like to see it. So Iain will elaborate on the specific areas and the risks associated with that. I will cover a little bit about what we found out and a bit about the Commission's work generally. So it pays to put it up front in the conversation that we learnt quite a bit about the industry as we were doing this, and it's something that we took into consideration when we were doing this. So we're well aware that this is a global market. Like a lot of the industries that we deal with, this is not confined to supply within New Zealand. You have a lot of other considerations going on. So it may well be that you're supplying this product actually in very small numbers within New Zealand. You're looking at a global market. There will also be some. That said, there are principles of compliance that are fairly common across jurisdictions, and so the information we'll talk about today stands you in good stead, at the very least, across those other jurisdictions. Publishers' rules. This is one that we are aware of. You're within not just a legal framework, but a contractual framework when you're supplying products across a platform. And one thing we'd probably be keen to make clear is that ultimately you are the supplier of that game. Even if it's going through an intermediary, you do have responsibilities in this space. So definitely worth being cognizant of those responsibilities and making sure that not only your product, but the way in which it's marketed by your platform or the platform you're using is also compliant with those principles. And the last one, it's a really hard industry to predict success in. And so there's a natural inclination to make really hopeful representations about where your game or your product might land in the market and how it might succeed or how it might be received. And there ought to be a bit of caution around that as well, because ultimately you're making future promises about the content of the game or what might follow in terms of updates and so on. Iain, as I say, will get into some more specific detail on that. So the broad question that we have for the room and that we had at the start of our sweep and our project was, is there a confidence that games that you supply are compliant? I can see a few nods, a few not sures, a few looking away, desperately not keen to answer the question. So don't worry, we're not here to tear apart anybody's games. We'll hopefully walk you through what we think are those key principles to consider in relation to the Fair Trading Act. So this is where we're going to go today. I will talk briefly about the Commission's work generally and how gaming fits into that. The Fair Trading Act specifically and how gaming sits within that framework. And then I'll move on to Iain. Iain will provide some very specific principles and risks around gaming, the gaming industry and compliance with the Fair Trading Act. As we said before, we will have that drop-in Q&A session. We're really happy to sit and have a conversation then as well. So a little bit about the Commerce Commission generally. We're an independent Crown entity, so we're not the policy maker. We are the regulatory or enforcement agency in this space. We are the primary competition, consumer and regulatory agency in New Zealand. What does that mean? So competition are those areas like mergers and cartels where there's activity happening in an industry that is detrimental to competition. Consumer, that's fair trading and consumer credit. Fair trading is the area that we're primarily involved in and that we'll talk about today. And then also the regulated industries, so areas like dairy and telco have got very specific rules that apply to them. As I say, we're going to talk about fair trading. It's quite a general set of rules. And also, in terms of how we approach our work, we get somewhere upwards of 14,000 complaints every year. We can't deal with everything that we get, so we have to prioritise our work. Typically, that comes in the form of enforcement priorities. We look at areas that we consider are the most harmful, or where we see the most serious conduct, or where there's a particular public interest. We also, on top of that, have set priority areas each year. And currently, one of those priorities last year and this year is online sales conduct, including gaming. So this is an area that the Commission is aware of and is actively looking at and looking for issues within the industry. So Fair Trading Act, headline principles here. This is a general piece of legislation that applies across industries, not just gaming, across everything. So whether it's buying sunscreen and making sure that your SPF is properly represented, whether it's getting a new carpet fitted in your home and making sure that the representations made are in fact truthful, that prices are accurate. The same bit of legislation, the same offences apply as they do to gaming. So it's really principles-based in terms of its application. It's not specific rules for specific industries. And I suppose important to point out there that we're not the gaming industry regulator. We are a general regulator. We split our function across a whole range of industries. It also applies not just to the product, but to the advertising of that product, and perhaps also to the sale of items within the product. So if we think about adverts you might be running on social media platforms for the product, the Fair Trading Act applies. If you're selling things like digital currencies within your game, the Fair Trading Act will apply to that transaction as well. So it covers the whole spectrum of that transactional relationship that you have with a consumer. A couple of pick-outs there as well. Anybody in trade, that's a really low threshold. If you are doing this for the purpose of profit or moving forward a business, then you are going to be covered by this. So just because you're a small independent developer doesn't mean that you're not in trade. You don't have to have a limited company. You can be a sole trader. It covers everybody. And so I suppose, why does it matter? And the headline there is that there are quite substantial fines involved for breaches here. So anything up to $600,000 per offence for companies and $200,000 for individuals. And that's not to put the frighteners on anybody. We think there's actually probably a more significant deterrent here or incentive to comply, and that's reputational risk. So typically, if we encounter a case where we've got a large number of complaints, it's because there's consumer upset at what's happening. If you're upsetting your consumers because they've been misled, they aren't coming back. They're probably telling their friends not to come back. You're getting bad reviews online. So probably more than the financial penalties that are available, there's a reputational risk that comes with some of this work as well. So, as I mentioned before, there are not specific rules that apply to gaming or the selling of games in any particular situation. These are really general requirements. You might be familiar with very specific rules, for example, the European GDPRs, or particular platform rules that you need to comply with. This is not that case. We're not going to give you a list of things that you have to tick off and do. These are principles-based. You need to think about it, and quite often thinking about it as a consumer is a good starting point. So how would I feel if I was getting this bit of advertising and this product that don't match? So we deal typically with principles, as I say, things like fairness, misleading, reasonable. They all carry some degree of subjectivity. So what you need to do is apply the mindset of a reasonable consumer to the situation. That might be quite different for you in your industry. Your reasonable consumer might not be the average reasonable consumer. If we asked 100 people on the street what was reasonable, it might differ from if we asked 100 gamers what's reasonable. So you need to really focus in on your particular industry, your particular consumers, and understand what's reasonable. So with that, I will follow, or I'll pass on to Iain, who will talk about particular principles that apply to gaming.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. It's not every day that you work at a regulator and you get to come to a game conference. I'm a gamer myself, and so it's really exciting to be here. What I want to connect up here is teaching you how to think a little bit like a compliance advisor or an investigator when viewing some of your marketing, and applying those principles such as being clear, being upfront, being truthful, being accountable, and being fair. So we're going to look out for these as we go through, and we're going to look at 5 key risks. What we kind of tried to do here is essentially look at the industry as we know it overseas, look at our regulatory legislation context here in New Zealand, and really pull out the ones that we can be quite sure on that these are the risks. And there might be some legislative grey areas that are, still need a bit of work on in terms of us being able to bring you a clear message. But these are the ones that we know from case law from other areas that these are the main risks. So the first one here is avoiding misleading discounts. And I thought it would be good to read you the legislation here just so you can connect it up. So 13G says, no person shall in trade in connection with the supply or possible supply of goods make a false or misleading representation with respect to the price of any goods or services. So that's what we've got, but how do we connect it up? Well, discounts that you give gamers must be a genuine opportunity to purchase at a lower than usual price. If you're selling at the usual price, is that a discount? I don't think so. So if you continually sell at a discount, 3 or 4 months, 6 months, a year, it really stops being a discount at that point and just becomes a usual selling price. And then the risk here is that you're misleading people about the price because they think they're getting a good deal, when in fact it's just the usual selling price. The other risk here is claiming a discount off a price that you've never charged, and I've got an example of that in a moment. Something that we see in the retail industry, unfortunately, is just before a discount is going to be applied, increasing the price to essentially cancel out the discount. So here's two examples, and we're going to be sharing a few examples through this presentation. Just a kind of caveat at the front, I suppose, is that these have been included as an example for you to get your head around, but they're not necessarily us saying this has breached the Act. Only the courts can decide if a breach of the Act has occurred. So this first one here, there's two green buttons here that look the same. This one here came in through our reports. Essentially, the allegation was that the original price of this cosmetic pack was $82 and it was on sale for 79% off, buy now for $16.99. But the gamer who told us about this said that the cosmetic items had never been on sale before. They were completely new. So this would be misleading about the extent of the savings you're going to be getting, because the original price might be calculated in the back end based on the value of those individual skin items. But if they haven't been sold, then it's misleading about the extent of savings there. This is another example from one of our sweeps where we have a bundle on offer. And the kind of first impression that we had of this is that the bundle had previously been sold for $24. And as we were tracking it throughout the course of our sweep, it didn't seem to sort of change from that price. When we spoke to that developer, they let us know that that price was kind of the combined value total of the items in the bundle. And a really important thing, if you're going to be doing this, those bundle items should actually be for sale at that price. Otherwise, it does just completely look like the previous selling price of the bundle. And a way to kind of tighten up compliance here would be to make it abundantly clear that this 24 price is the price of individual skinned items in the pack, and to kind of correct that impression. And if there are multiple interpretations, and one of them is correct and one of them is misleading, the general view is that the whole representation will become misleading if one of those interpretations is misleading. So you want to try to cancel out any possibility that you'll be misunderstood there. In 2022, retail company Strand Bags, if you've ever bought a case out there to go overseas, you may have encountered them. They were fined $780,000 for some of their discounting practices, such as having a previous strike-through representation that had been charged for a long, long time or had not been charged at all. And so this created a misleading perception of the value of some of the sales that they were using to promote their products. So the principles here to connect it up with Section 13G is to be truthful, give gamers a real deal, right? And I think gamers will really appreciate if they're not kind of being misled in this way. If it's a real deal, then it may be that you have to take things off sale every now and then and actually not hard code some of those sale items within the game, because that would present a substantial risk. And a principle that we often talk to businesses about is just essentially being clear. How do you know if you're being clear? Because in your mind it makes sense, right? Like you're the one who built the marketing. It all makes sense to you. So a good sense check for this would be grab someone who hasn't been involved in the marketing and hasn't been, may not have any prior knowledge of this, and just run it past them. What's their overall impression of this pricing, this sale that you've got on? What's the kind of takeaway that they're getting? And if we go back to this one here, what's the sort of overall impression of that? Do they know that the strike through is the individual value of the bundled items? Is that what they think? And if not, then you might need to tighten up a little bit. So the next area is to avoid dark practices. Dark practices is essentially design principles that businesses can use to manipulate gamer attention towards a desirable outcome for the game developer or the business, and a less desirable outcome for the gamer. We see these a lot in the retail industry, but they come up a lot in the gaming industry as well. And manipulating user attention can be a great game design principle if it's not connected to some sort of commercial sale. Really driving gamers towards certain in-game activities, giving them a sense of reward and achievement. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about connecting this up to fair trade principles. So the part of the Act that this applies to, it would be Section 10 or 11, which is, no person shall in trade engage in conduct that is liable to mislead the public as to the nature, manufacturing process, characteristics, suitability for a purpose, or quantity of goods. And quite legal jargon there, but so if your conduct is liable to mislead about the characteristics of a particular part of the journey, then that presents a risk here, such as using a fake countdown timer that is programmed to reset. Describing commonly available products as rare and one-off when in fact they're commonly available. Designing game UI to manipulate users into purchasing, sort of confirm shaming them, giving them pop-ups to say, are you sure you want to quit? Are you really sure you don't want to purchase this? So here's an example of a timer that on its face is, we haven't investigated this, but looks to be compliant. I wanted to give you a positive example. Here we have the timer, 11 hours, 59 minutes, and we've got 3 items that are available for that daily sale. When I came back 24 hours later, and you can see I was very close to the time, 56 seconds, and those 3 items had changed. So the impression I had was, I'm only going to be getting these items for 1 day, and when I came back, that proved to be the case. So tick. Where this is going to be getting into a misleading area is when I come back after 24 hours and those 3 items are still there. So I know timers are very popular inside in-game carts. So just make sure they aren't hard-coded to reset, because that's going to be a risk of breach. So in 2022, retail company One Day, which was fined $840,000 for its today-only deals, they had a 24-hour promotional timer on a range of products. For example, an Apple AirPods that were available at the same price for 66 days in a row, and 33 consecutive days described as daily deals. So that company was fined under the Fair Trading Act for that, and a good cautionary tale for the gaming industry, I think. Anyone using those type of timers. So connecting it up with our principles here is to be truthful, and I think this means do what you say you will do. When you install a timer or you describe something as rare, the plain meaning of that is that it is actually a timer and that it is actually rare. If it proves not to be the case, then that's where you've started to likely mislead the gamer. So design games with willing consent in mind, and I think building in consent checks is a really important way that you can reduce the risk here. Say you've got a series of sales on and you want to remind the gamer about it. Make it clear where they're purchasing in-game currency that has nothing to do with real currency, or if they are using real currency, then you really want to check that they know that they're going to be purchasing something. You can actually make it a little bit too easy for people to accidentally purchase in-game items. And an example that we may have seen in the news is with Fortnite. they had some skins, and there was a little button down the bottom saying this is a paid purchase, and many children were not aware of that, didn't read that, and they were signed in with their parents' credit card and spent many thousands of dollars. So building in a consent check there would be kind of saying, hey, are you sure you want to spend this? And you might be thinking, well, what about churn at that point? Well, I think there's an important thing here of you don't want to alienate gamers by tricking them. And if you develop a reputation for being fair and honest and truthful, then I think that's a good thing, and that can build trust with your company. So the next one is to avoid misleading free claims, and this is under 13G as well, the same part of the Act. It's very common for mobile developers to sell their game for free, and not trying to disrupt the system here by saying don't do that. The point is here, if you are marketing your game for free and it really costs to pay, for example, you get in and there's immediately some sort of hard paywall for most of the game content, that might be fine if you've made that clear in the marketing and the gamer knows that that's the case. But if you've used a lot of some of the paid assets to market the game and you haven't made that clear, the gamer might develop a misleading impression that the free, they can access that paid content for free. So here's an example from one of our reports where a board game company was describing the potential to, download a free companion app. But then when you did download the free companion app, it required a monthly subscription in order to actually use it. So my suggestion would be, if it is going to be paid, then to make that upfront on the back of the board game that there is a kind of cost, and not to describe it as free when it's not really free. We do know a lot about how subscriptions can mislead consumers, and we have a lot of examples of that where companies might pre-select or default a subscription into the process. And if you're not paying attention, you've accidentally subscribed and you've committed yourself to an ongoing payment. So going back to that consent check idea, what we're really looking at here is just designing the process with a little bit of friction so that you don't get people with low attention accidentally purchasing subscriptions. And again, that's going to disrupt gamer confidence in your brand. It's possibly going to develop some churn long-term as gamers become alienated because they feel they've been tricked. So we think it's important to be upfront. Here we have an example of 2 Degrees Mobile, and they were fined $325,000 here for describing free roaming services available in Australia that you could get at no extra cost. But in the terms and conditions, it was only available for 90 days. And so free for a bit, but not really the case. And so they were fined for that misleading representation. This is a really, really big principle, and it's just to be upfront about those terms and conditions. If you can, don't rely at all on them to potentially correct a misleading impression. So disclose the costs prominently and make it difficult to overlook. And this is all part of being truthful and being honest. So if there are costs if there are free elements of your game and there are parts that cost, I know DLC packs are really prominent, then as long as that's clear, that's going to be you meeting that requirement. So do gamers know when they open up your game? Do they know what's free? Do they know what's going to cost them? Your marketing, has it sort of misrepresented the free component versus the paid component? Exaggerated promises is probably the one that is going to be catching out some smaller indie developers. I think the bigger game development companies have probably ironed out a lot of this stuff, but the parts of the Act that this relates to is Section 12A, which says a person in trade must not make an unsubstantiated representation. And an unsubstantiated representation is making the representation at the time without reasonable grounds for that representation, irrespective of whether that representation is false or misleading. Wow. And the other one is Section 21. No person shall demand or accept payment or consideration of goods and services if at the time of the demand they do not have reasonable grounds to believe they will be able to supply the goods or services within the specified period. So what this means is that you must be able to back up your claims at the time they're made. It's best to avoid making promises that you know that you can't deliver on. As an indie developer, you're probably not going to necessarily know what your game is going to look like in 3 or 4 years. So it's just about making sure that you're not exaggerating what features and components of the game are going to be definitely there. And a way that you can reduce the risk, which is in Section 12B, talks about doing any research or taking any steps at the time that you make the claim to demonstrate that you thought if everything followed to plan, then you would have been able to deliver that product and that feature. So you make the claim, in 12 months' time, you find out, oh, I couldn't back that up. Then you change the claim. You update it to make it accurate. And if the Commerce Commission did come knocking and investigated your company, the first thing we would do is ask for a copy of that cost plan, which would demonstrate at the time you made that claim, you did think you could do it. So the risk here is marketing incomplete games as if they were complete and making future promises that later prove to be false that you didn't have reasonable grounds to back up. And just one from popular culture at this point. We know about Escape from Tarkov, the Edge of Darkness edition offered gamers this very juicy claim here that they would have free access to all subsequent DLCs, which, if you're a gamer, this is a really, really big claim that might actually make you pay $150 because you think, long term, I'm going to save a lot of money here. And I know this is a game that's in beta, and so in that time, I'm going to be getting a really good benefit for my money when the DLC comes out. But unfortunately, when the Unheard edition was released with the new PvE, Person vs. Environment mode, that wasn't available for gamers who had purchased the Edge of Darkness edition. And of course, there was a huge backlash, and gamers felt they'd been misled by this claim here. And so, this isn't one that the Commission investigated, but I think what the company did was they responded to the community backlash by providing the PvE. And a quote here is that Escape from Tarkov has alienated its entire community over broken promises, which I think is the big risk here if you do kind of overextend your promise without having reasonable grounds to back it up. In 2017, Fujitsu claimed to sell New Zealand's most energy-efficient heat pump. Unfortunately, that was found to be not the case, and they were fined $310,000. A central fact in this case was that they had relied on testing that had been done only in a lab and not in the real-world environment. And so another kind of key point here is that it might be common for you to rely on some people providing you information that you act on. Ultimately, it's on you, even if you rely on that, in this case, the lab's testing report. It's on you who's making the claim to be accurate. So the principles here are to be accountable for the claims that you make. Make a plan before you make a bold claim. Keep records of how you plan to deliver. And if you have a retention policy, it'd be good to make sure that you've factored in keeping a record of these types of plans so that you could potentially substantiate or back up your claim a bit further down the track. Don't delete them. Update your records when things change. Again, the important thing here is to be truthful and to deliver what you said you would. And if it becomes clear, actually, I can't deliver this anymore, just be honest and be truthful with gamers if you can't deliver. And the other principle here is to be upfront. If your game is a work in progress and you're marketing it as if it's complete and already just about to be delivered in that form, a risk here might be using AI, for example, to completely generate what the game will look like, giving the impression that you're able to just immediately deliver that on release. Make it obvious if your game is a work in progress and if you have used some sort of creative license to demonstrate what will become available. So the last area here is the risk of ignoring gamers' rights. And this connects up with two pieces of legislation, and the connection is a little bit complicated, so bear with me. Essentially, the Consumer Guarantees Act provides certain rights to gamers or consumers, and it is misleading under the Fair Trading Act, Section 13I. No person shall in trade in connection with the supply or possible supply of goods or services make a false or misleading representation concerning the existence, exclusion, effect of any condition, warranty, guarantee, right or remedy, including, to avoid doubt, in relation to any guarantee, right or remedy available under the Consumer Guarantees Act. Which essentially means if gamers have rights under the Consumer Guarantees Act, then you can't mislead them about the existence of those rights or the effect of those rights. And I suspect that this might be an area that many of you have thought quite deeply about because you'll be selling to people overseas and you'll have customers here in New Zealand as well. And so, to what extent can you service those rights? The risk is claiming gamers have no rights at all to a remedy or a refund, saying no refund at all, or refusing to repair game-breaking bugs, or writing terms and conditions that contract out of those rights. And the definition of consumer, I think this is an area where you might want to look at getting some legal advice if a lot of your customer base is overseas. But if the transaction is taking place in New Zealand, we believe that the Consumer Guarantees Act would apply. If the transaction is taking place overseas, for example, an overseas gamer, we think it may apply, but a lot of overseas jurisdictions do have essentially identical or very similar consumer protection legislation and may actually go further than what we have here in New Zealand. So it's good to just be aware that consumer protection does exist. And an example of this would be a game that has a game-breaking bug where it essentially crashes continually, it can't be played. The gamer at that point might have a right to a remedy such as you repairing the game or offering a refund. Some kind of playable but disturbing bugs may be funny initially, but can completely ruin the experience. And some gamers might have a right actually at that point to request a refund. So I don't want to overextend here in terms of the advice that we can provide, but the key point is that if something is not as described, and a gamer under the Consumer Guarantees Act would have essentially a right to a remedy. And if there is some sort of fault, then they would likely have a right to a remedy as well. One really key point here is that platforms often take charge of some of this stuff for you, and they might have their own rules around providing refunds. In fact, you might not even have control over the refunds that you're able to provide. One really important thing that we wanted to pass on, we're aware of that and we're kind of factoring that into our future work, but is that ultimately you are responsible. The platform is a third party, and if we go back to that example of Fujitsu, who was relying on that testing report, there's a certain extent where you might be over-relying on a company that is not doing the right thing. It's on you to really make sure that you do the right thing. So just recently, actually a couple of months ago, Jetstar was fined $2.25 million for misleading consumers about their right to a refund when their flights were cancelled due to a fault with the airline. So that's one that Jetstar could have had control over. And so this is a big cautionary tale where even big companies like Jetstar may try to kind of mislead consumers about their right. So be fair. If something goes wrong, fix it. And that's why I do think with big companies, you probably do have big studios, you're going to have processes in place to really quickly fix things. So this might be a message more for indie developers. Provide an avenue where a consumer can report concerns and make requests for remedies. Might be something like creating a portal on your website or a specific email address for those types of requests, and making sure that you train up staff within the studio who are going to be responding with an understanding of consumer protection legislation. Probably something that I missed here when I was writing this is that I think the biggest impact is going to be felt overseas, where there are a whole range of consumer protection requirements. So I wouldn't want to be caught kind of giving advice about those jurisdictions that I don't understand. Have a think about where you mainly sell your games and where those transactions are taking place, and think about whether it might be worth getting some legal advice on that particular jurisdiction just to make sure that you're covering consumer protection legislation. So, are you confident that your games comply? Hopefully this has taught you a little bit how to think about the Fair Trading Act, those guiding principles, hopefully increase your confidence. I suspect that some of you may have some questions, so we will be available at the drop-in clinic on level 2 up there and over that side. We'll be there for 30 minutes. Would absolutely love to speak to anyone. I know there's a few people here that I've already spoken to previously. But yeah, would really welcome your feedback as well if you want to grab your phone and do that QR code. This is something we want to be able to tell our managers. Was this successful? Was this something that landed well? Should we be doing more talks like this? So we would really love your feedback, and I'll leave that on the screen, and thank you very much. We're a little bit early, actually.
We could do some questions now if anybody had anything quick, if you like, or...
Yep, happy to do that. Do you want to come up?
Cheers. I think you mentioned that in your sweep you'd contacted 10 studios. Are they playing nice, or have you got pushback? They're telling you that you're going after them unfairly?
Yeah, great question. We've had a lovely experience engaging with the game development community, and the feedback has been really positive, I think. A lot of people expressed that this is their first contact with the Commission, and really appreciated the chance to really reflect on the Fair Trading Act in New Zealand. So I've had a great time. Hopefully those studios did as well.
Cheers.
Hello.
Hello.
Got a question then about minimum specifications. So if you're releasing a game for use on PC, obviously the world is full of all sorts of different types of computers. Mm-hmm. And most games will publish a minimum specification requirement mm-hmm. that consumers should be aware of before they elect to purchase the game.
Yeah.
Are those considered to be fair in the case where someone decides to purchase a game without having the correct specification of a computer?
Great question. I think if those specifications are really, really difficult to meet and require ultra specifications of, the latest GPU, that type of thing, it might be worth making sure that that's prominently described somewhere that people are going to see it. But if we're talking about really fact-specific scenarios where, people 10 years, they might be running on 10-year-old tech, aren't able to kind of do it, then, it's that kind of gets a little bit more grey. I think it probably goes into the consumers need to be paying attention. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one, Grant?
Yeah, I mean, I think Iain summed it up well there. I think it depends a bit on how reasonable the expectation is. If you're, as I say, in that top 5% of equipment that's required to run this particular game, then your disclosure of that fact is going to have to be equally or adequately prominent to disclose that. If 95% of those purchasing the game would reasonably be expected to run it without problem, then perhaps the disclosure doesn't have to be quite as prominent. So it's a really difficult question to answer with a single answer. It really depends on what that spec is and how prominently you disclose it. So you need to find that balance somewhere really to make sure that if you're getting a lot of kickback from people saying, we can't run this game, then you've probably not disclosed that prominently enough. So, yeah.
The other thing I would add under the Consumer Guarantees Act is if something's not as described, the gamer might have a right to a remedy there or a refund. But if you are describing it accurately, then it really, I kind of think that it's on them to make sure that they're kind of informing themselves of their purchase, in addition to what Grant has said. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, I think so. I have one additional question, if I may. You got your hand up over there. It's a quick one, hopefully.
Yeah.
You mentioned, like in the case where you do come under investigation and you need to supply records. There are a lot of applications these days which don't help you with version control. There's always just kind of the latest version. They say like Google Sheets or something like this. If you're keeping all your forecasts and plans and things in a Google Sheet and you're constantly keeping it updated, what is the best practice to ensure that you're correctly keeping versions of your plans?
Again, this kind of goes back to principles. There's not a real hard requirement, but my instinct is that if there's a significant departure from the plan, not just a minor tweak in the plan, maybe you should sort of save that separately, just so that you've got like a real clear version control process. Yeah. I think what would happen in the case of an investigation, what we would do is say, provide at the time you made this claim documents or information to confirm that you knew you could back this up. And if you weren't able to provide that, it would probably come out that you sort of didn't have the reasonable grounds, even if you used to. So I think just to mitigate the risk, good to keep some of those on file if they're going to be disappearing through version control.
We're just at time now, so last question.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question around consumer rights and things like refunds. A lot of the platform partners like the Apple App Store and Google Play Store, they actually control that part of the purchase flow. So I'm just curious, like, where does the liability or onus lie when customers complain and they can't complain to us and they can't get refunded by us because we don't provide the payment service? Where does the onus lie there?
Yeah, it depends on the nature of the refund request. Under the Consumer Guarantees Act, If it's a change of mind request, it's not covered. But if it's a fault, something that might be covered, then it may be insufficient to rely on the platform's kind of default position. And yeah, I kind of don't want to overextend beyond that because it gets really fact specific. And I know this is a systemic issue in terms of how games are supplied through the platforms, and they have these really hard and fast rules. So that's something we're taking note of and we'll think about. Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'll catch some of you at the drop-in session. And yeah, thanks for anyone who had some feedback and appreciate your time today.